So, not too long ago, this bad boy happened to arrive at my front door, and contrary to what you might believe at first glance, it's actually not a part of any normal line of teles that Fender has going on right now, and that's because it's a Susan Tedeschi signature. Now, I've spent the past month or so really looking into different types of Telecasters ever since I got the opportunity to go with my friends to the Fender showroom, where I got to play basically every one they had in stock, or at least all of the major ones. And I'm talking everything from the Mexican teles to the signatures, all the way up to the American vintage line. And unbeknownst to my friends in the moment, I was basically using this time to do undercover research on what I thought would be the next great tele in a long line of guitars that I would have this whole love affair with on this channel. But right as I was about to make my decision, most likely on the American Vintage 2, I was doing some research online and I stumbled across this. A guitar that I didn't even know existed, and I thought I knew everything about the American guitars that Fender had in that price range, but simply out of curiosity, I thought it would be more fun than the American Vintage 2. But once it got here and I started playing it, I realized that I might have found what I believe to be the most underrated tele that Fender has on the market right now, and I want to tell you why. So my history with this guitar actually goes back way farther than I originally thought when I first found it. I initially stumbled across Susan after a very short-lived stint in college where I tried to learn to play slide for the first time. And I ended up quitting because I had a huge problem with perseverance, but if anything good came of that, I did end up coming across one of the guys who I would later consider to be one of the 5 greatest guitar players currently living on this big blue rock. And finding out about Derek also meant finding out about his band, the Tedeschi Trucks Band. But Derek was really only one half of the band's namesake. The other half was his wife, Susan. I quickly learned that this girl happened to have some of the most powerful blues vocals that I had ever heard in my entire life. I mean, every single time. It was like she was singing from her soul, and I instantly became a fan. They became one of those bands where even if I was completely exhausted from listening to blues, it never felt like they got old because Derek's solos were so good and Susan's vocals were so pristine, but for some reason, Susan was just a little bit more of an enigma to me. And to combat a lot of that, I started looking at the backlog of a lot of her earlier blues work, and I found out that this chick could play. I mean, like, really play. I came from the mindset of admiring the Stevie Ray Vaughns of the world, so it was really cool to see this girl who wasn't necessarily the fastest technical player, but was clearly inspired by that slow, intentional blues from guys like Jimmy Vaughn and B.B. King. But every time I would see her play these really tasty licks, specifically on a track called Just Won't Burn, I was noticing that almost always she was playing this green tele. I thought that thing was absolutely sick. It had this Caribbean mist body with a tortoiseshell pit guard and what seemed to be like writing maybe signatures on there. Unsurprisingly, looked a lot like this. Now, apparently Susan found that guitar at a store in 1993, played it all over the world, and it would eventually become the direct inspiration for the signature all those years later. But I didn't hear anything about it when it came out. Like I said earlier, I didn't even know it existed until I started doing research on the American vintage models. I didn't know anyone who had ever played one or owned one, so when it came here, it was really cool that I had absolutely zero expectation on what it was supposed to sound like or feel like, and I think that's a lot of what got me. But I think it would be better rather than just telling you to show you what I'm talking about. The way I'm going to mic it up today, safest way I know how, the 121 with the Tone King, because when I was first feeling this thing out in terms of recorded tones, this was the first setup that I used that made me really like it. And this is just also the setup that I know how to use the best. Just a little bit off the center so it's not too bright. first things I noticed, especially when I started playing through the neck pickup, was that it was a little bit noisy. And the more that I actually played through it and thought about it, that made a lot of sense, because you think this is a girl whose main influences are all these old school blues guys. When they're designing this, their first thought was probably not, let's put some noiseless pickups in here. It reminds me a lot and has a very similar sonic aesthetic to my G&L, where it's a guitar that's a little bit noisy and the pickups have a lot of character, but in some ways the noise is almost part of that character. And I didn't just feel like that when I was playing through my amp in the room and really getting to recognize what these things sound like, but also when I was jamming over tracks that I wasn't even recording on, just soloing over backing tracks in different songs, where I almost had to feel like I made these slight mental adjustments because the pickups have so much character, and that carried me all the way into when I tried the middle pickup. Now, simply ergonomically, the middle pickup on a tele is something that I've come to really appreciate. When I started really digging into the world of funk and starting to want to do the Corey Wong thing, as a Strat player, especially on the 4 position, those tones worked absolutely perfectly. The one problem is a lot of the times I got really out of hand with how I was strumming, and the pickup position would always switch pretty much every single time. And I've never had that problem on a tele. Now, outside of just the ergonomics in the world of Corey Wong, the middle position of a tele is one of those things that I found I really underutilized, and one of the things that really stuck out to me about the tone of this was just going back and forth between the neck and the middle pickup and seeing the differences. But those were really only 2 of the 3. When it comes to the tele, I had to see if it was going to do the tele thing in the bridge. One of the earliest descriptions that I read on this thing described it as a 6-string that was built for blues, like exact quote. So I wondered what that meant for the bridge pickup, if it was really going to be able to do the twangy tele thing. And this is coming from someone who is by no means a chicken picker, but is trying to get in that world and wanting to see if this tele could live up to everything that that is supposed to do. But even through just playing a couple of simple licks on the bridge, I was really taken aback with how much treble there actually was, even more so than some of my twangiest teles, and I wanted to find out the reason behind it. So I did some research, and it was pretty simple. The main reason is because this guitar has something that I'd never actually played before called a TBX circuit. Now, what TBX stands for is treble bass expander, and basically what that does is that it decreases the resistance. Wait, pause. Okay, let me give you a much simpler explanation. Essentially, it's all about the tone knob. So when you're going from 0 to 5, your tone knob is acting regular like it would on any guitar. But once you get from 5 to 10, you actually start adding more presence, and it almost works like a treble boost. So you get this thing where, let's say it's a 5, that's regular, but you push it all the way up to 10. You're getting all that extra treble, which is giving you so much more tonal variety from what this thing can do from 0 all the way up to 10, which is part of the reason why I was so taken aback by how much twang I was getting out of this thing, because as a person who a lot of the times leaves their tone dimed, when I was first playing through the bridge, I was like, wow, not knowing that I already had that extra presence treble boost because of the TBX circuit. It's one of those things that almost makes you think very differently about the way you approach the tone knob as per all of the other Telecasters you'll use. And in just doing a little bit more research, I found out that this is actually the only Telecaster, I believe, that Fender actually has that circuit in. And it's that type of uniqueness combined with the general feel of the neck that I think really set this guitar apart for me. Because one of the other things that I wrote down in my initial response was just how not chunky this neck was. And as someone with fairly large hands, I tend to surprise myself a lot of the times as to how okay I am with necks necks that aren't necessarily really beefy. Like, this is really slim. I think also closer on the lines with the neck, when it came to the actual setup, this guitar came with 9s. And as someone who, like I said before, comes from the world of like the Stevie Ray Vaughns, thinking you need a really chunky neck, putting 13s or you're not a real man, one of the things that I'm really finding is that it's okay to have different preferences than your heroes. Just because Stevie Ray Vaughan was using 13s or whatever mythical string gauge he was using doesn't mean that everyone has to be okay with using that, or you're not going to get great tone at all. There are differences in string gauges when it comes to tones and what to expect, but some of my favorite players of all time, they use 10s, and even more recently in starting to play the Yamaha Pacificas on more of a regular basis, those guitars are what really dove me into this world, because they came with 9s, and those are the first ones I had ever seen on a guitar that I really love. Now, even with all of that being said, I think it's important to touch on one aspect of this guitar that makes me quite sad. The whole point of all of this in general, that it's flying quite under the radar. But in a lot of ways, I get it. Signature models, unless they're the Silver Sky or say one of like the Hendrix models, are never going to sell as well as the flagships like say an American Vintage or even an American Pro. And everyone in general, I think, understands that. Susan is a very well-known name in the broader guitar community, but even with that, at times it can be really hard. And even beyond those aspects, I saw relatively few people actually discussing this online. Fender made their original video like they do with all of their signature artists, where they were showing the construction behind the guitar, interviewing Susan, showing her original inspiration behind all of this. But outside of that, I saw maybe 2 YouTube videos on the entire platform of people actually playing it and showing what makes it different. And that's the thing that I love and I don't love, because on the one hand, I do think this guitar isn't getting the love it deserves, because quality-wise, I think it's as good as any of those other teles. And on the other hand, it feels like you're getting into that hidden gem effect, where it's really cool to know about what feels like this secret guitar that not many people know about yet. Especially at this price point, where its main competition is going to be something like the American Pro models at just a hair cheaper and at just a hair more expensive. You have the American Ultra models, and even going further than that, some of the other signatures from Fender like the Jason Isbell, which lends itself a lot more to more traditional country players. And trust me, I do understand that with something like a signature model, they're not going to make 50,000 units like with the Player Series or with the Venteras. It's very similar to the idea of the Melanie Faye guitar that I have from D'Angelico, where one of my favorite things is being able to share it with friends, even friends who know a little bit about D'Angelico, and being able to say, okay, this is a guitar that in a lot of ways is very similar, like this is to the Telecasters, but also has these little things like the TBX circuit that make it so unique and different from all those other ones. But at the end of the day, I'm glad they made a guitar like this, and I'm glad that looking at one of the bigger, if not the biggest guitar companies in the world, especially when it comes to their signatures, that they're able to do some of those more unique things, even if they're just little tweaks to set it apart from the main line of Telecasters, both aesthetically and tonally, and how they don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, if we're going to use office speak for a second, but just make specifications that are more unique to like Susan Tedeschi's specific playing, that or whoever the artist is, that we can really take a look at for the first time. At the end of the day, I don't think it matters what I think. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. Have you played the Susan Tedeschi signature? Have you seen it? What's your favorite signature tele that Fender has on the market right now? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I would tell you that this project is a long time coming, but again, I've only known about this guitar for less than a month, so it was really cool to be able to expand my knowledge of like Susan Tedeschi's inspirations and her playing, and just to be able to cover again what I think is one of the more underappreciated teles that Fender has on the market. But if you want to know anything more about said tele, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. Make sure to check it out. It's one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I use in this video, amps, mics, cameras, make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you to all my patrons. There's some exclusive extra content on there if you want to join the community. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, like most important of all, have a fantastic night.